At the end of June, 74 BC, a small procession of about 200 men was racing westward from the kingdom of Changyi in Shandong. At its center was the royal carriage of the Prince of Changyi, Liu He, surrounded by his elite household guard and closest advisors. They rode at a frantic pace, covering 135 Han Li, about 56 kilometers, from noon till night. Inside the carriage, the young prince kept urging them on, "Faster, faster, even faster." By nightfall, the exhausted horses were collapsing, but the prince ordered fresh ones and pushed onward. His old tutor, Gong Sui, advised him to rest. But Liu He would not listen. In his eyes, this old advisor was good for little more than making one feel ashamed. That is, moral lectures. In truth, anyone in Liu He's position would have likely made the same decision and felt the same electrifying urgency. Just that morning, the not yet 20-year-old prince had received an edict from the capital, Chang'an. The Grand Marshal, Huo Guang, in the name of the Empress Dowager Shangguan, had summoned him to the imperial court immediately. Less than a month earlier, the reigning Emperor Zhao had died, childless. So what could this edict mean? It meant that of all the imperial relatives with a claim to the throne, the central government had chosen him. The Prince of Changyi, Liu He, was about to become the Son of Heaven, the emperor of this great empire. So there was no hesitation, no waiting. He received the edict in the morning, set out by noon, and had covered 135 li by nightfall. On the metric of sheer drive, Liu He deserved a perfect score. The straight-line distance from Changyi to the imperial capital, Chang'an, was about 700 kilometers. Given the road conditions of the time, this meant a journey of some 2,000 Han Li. We don't know how many days it took Liu He to complete this journey, nor how many horses died along the way. The history books emphasize his tutor's desperate pleas, his collecting of fine foods and beautiful women even as he raced, and the ill omens that appeared. But none of that was the point. The point was that by mid-July of 74 BC at the latest, Liu He and his 200 men arrived in the imperial capital. Because on July 18th, the Prince of Changyi, Liu He, accepted the imperial seal and tassel and became the new emperor of the Han Empire. The court officials assembled, their cries of "Long live the emperor!" echoing like a tsunami. Seated on the great throne in the Weiyang Palace, Liu He was triumphant, perhaps even dizzy with excitement. Beside him knelt the man who controlled the empire, the Grand Marshal, Huo Guang, his eyes flickering and unreadable, like the candles in the Great Hall.
Hello everyone and welcome to China Puzzle. I'm ZYQ. Today we're diving into the year 74 BC, a fascinating and chaotic year in the history of the Han Empire. In this single year, one emperor died, another was dethroned, and two new emperors ascended. This rapid turnover of power serves as a perfect case study for understanding the complex issue of succession in China's imperial system. So, our first puzzle, why Liu He? When the 21-year-old Emperor Zhao died childless, the question of who would succeed him became the most critical issue in the empire. On the surface, there were many options, but in reality, very few were viable. First, even Huo Guang, who had held power for over a decade, could not simply overthrow the dynasty and make himself emperor. That kind of move would only become a possibility some 80 years later. At this moment, with the Liu family's mandate still strong, it was a suicidal proposition.
So, the only viable path for Huo Guang and the court was to choose the most suitable candidate from among the imperial relatives. The most popular choice at the time was Liu Shu, the Prince of Guangling. He was the most senior of all the living princes, a son of the great Emperor Wu and the older brother of the late Emperor Zhao. But what was the standard for suitable? Was it strength, political skill, moral character, popular support? None of the above. At this moment, The only standard that mattered was Huo Guang's. It's not about what you think is best, it's about what I think is best. In other words, who would be most beneficial to Huo Guang maintaining his grip on power?
From this perspective, Liu Shu was a walking red flag. First, his ambition for the throne was an open secret. Second, he was too old, even older than Huo Guang himself. And most importantly, he was a ruthless and ambitious prince in the prime of his life. How could he possibly be controlled? So, Liu Shu was out. Huo Guang then turned his gaze to the prince of Changyi, Liu He. This young man had a bad reputation at court, known for his frivolous and indulgent behavior. But in Huo Guang's eyes, this was a feature, not a bug. An emperor who drowns himself in pleasure is a regent's dream. And Liu He had another decisive advantage: his mother's family.
Liu He's father was the first prince of Changyi, a son of Emperor Wu, and his grandmother was Emperor Wu's famous and beloved consort, Lady Li. Lady Li's brother was the powerful general, Li Guangli. At first glance, this looked like another powerful consort clan. But here's the twist. In the witchcraft crisis of 90 BC, the Li family was implicated and exterminated. General Li Guangli, who was on campaign at the time, defected to the Jiongnu. So, by 74 BC, Liu He's maternal clan had been wiped out, both physically and politically. Legitimacy through bloodline, flaws that made him easy to control, and no powerful in-laws to challenge the regent. In Huo Guang's eyes, this was the optimal solution. And so, with an edict from the Empress Dowager Shangguan, Huo Guang's own granddaughter, Liu He came to Chang'an and became the 9th emperor of the Han dynasty.
Now, we cannot simply condemn Huo Guang's actions as selfish. In a crisis of succession for a political entity the size of the Han Empire, the need for stability overrides all other concerns. An unsuitable heir or an illegitimate process could easily lead to civil war and chaos. On this point, we must look to two examples from the other side of the world, the Roman Empire.
First, the year of the 4 emperors in 69 AD. This was the ultimate manifestation of Rome's collapsed succession system. After Nero's death, a power vacuum emerged. The legions in Spain hailed their governor, Galba, as emperor, but he was soon assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, who then acclaimed Otho. Meanwhile, the legions in Germany declared for their commander, Vitellius, who marched on Italy and defeated Otho. Vitellius's brief and brutal reign was soon challenged by the legions in the east, who proclaimed their general, Vespasian, as emperor. Vespasian's forces ultimately captured Rome, killed Vitellius, and founded the Flavian dynasty. Second, the failure of the Tetrarchy. In 293 AD, the Emperor Diocletian launched a bold and logical reform to solve the succession problem once and for all. The empire was to be ruled by 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars, chosen by them. This system attempted to replace blood inheritance with meritocratic selection. However, this carefully designed system collapsed in less than a generation. When the Western Augustus, Constantius, died in 306 AD, his troops ignored the designated Caesar and proclaimed his son, Constantine, as emperor. This triggered a chain reaction, leading to another round of brutal civil wars. As the historian John Granger aptly puts it, a widespread social preference for hereditary succession destroyed the Tetrarchy. You see, compared to the Chinese system, which combined the mandate of heaven with a clear patrilineal succession system, the Roman imperial succession was filled with uncertainty and institutional flaws.
Now, let's return to Huo Guang's choice. Did he pick a pawn? Yes. Did he make the choice that was most beneficial to himself? Yes. But at that moment, the choice most beneficial to Huo Guang was also the choice most beneficial to the empire. A peaceful transfer of power was in everyone's best interest. However, what happened next was a study in irony.
Just 27 days after Liu He became emperor, Huoguang summoned the court officials and declared his grave concerns. The new emperor, he said, was depraved and dissolute and a danger to the state. He then sincerely asked them, "As a pillar of the state, what should I do?" The ministers were terrified into silence. "You just installed this emperor yourself, and now you want to depose him? What is this, some kind of trap?" Amidst the silence, the signal they were waiting for appeared. An official named Tian Yannian and the general Zhang Anshi drew their swords. "What choice do you have?" they declared. "You must remove him. Otherwise, how can you face the ancestors of the Han? There is no room for debate. Any minister who hesitates will be executed by this sword." The message was clear. The ministers roared in unison. "The Grand Marshals will be done." Of course, it couldn't really be just the Grand Marshal's decision. That wouldn't be proper. It had to be the Empress Dowager's decision. But as we've already said, the Empress Dowager was Huoguang's own maternal granddaughter, and she was only 15 years old. Now, you might be asking, why did a 15-year-old girl hold the ultimate authority to depose an emperor? For the full incredible story of Empress Shangguan's life, you can watch our dedicated episode right here in the info card. At Huoguang's request, she was brought to the Weiyang Palace. She issued a secret decree. All palace gates were to be barred to the men from Changyi. The unsuspecting Liu He arrived to see the Empress Dowager. As he stepped through the doors of the hall, the eunuchs on either side slammed them shut, locking his entourage outside. "What is the meaning of this?" Liu He demanded. Huoguang knelt. "There is an edict from the Empress Dowager. The men from Changyi are not permitted to enter." "Take it easy," Liu He said, annoyed. "What's with all the drama?" Huoguang then ordered the men from Changyi to be expelled. General Zhang Anshi led the feathered cavalry, arrested all 200 of them, and threw them in the state prison. Meanwhile, the late emperor's loyal attendants were assigned to serve and guard Liu He. The Grand Marshal was particularly concerned for his safety, saying, "Guard him well. If he meets with an accident or commits suicide, I will be branded a regicide." At this point, Liu He still didn't realize he was about to be deposed. "What crime did my men commit?" he complained. A moment later, the Empress Dowager's edict arrived, summoning him. A wave of fear washed over him. "What have I done?" he muttered, "to be summoned like this?" He entered the great hall to find the Empress Dowager in full regalia, seated on a throne within a martial tent, surrounded by hundreds of armed guards. The ministers filed in. Liu He prostrated himself. Huoguang and the officials then jointly presented a memorial, listing Liu He's crimes. "Indulgent and dissolute, has violated the imperial rights and brought chaos to the Han system. He must be removed." After the reading, the Empress Dowager issued her edict. It was a single word: permitted. "I have heard," Liu He cried out, "that the Son of Heaven has 7 ministers who will speak truth to power. Even if he is without virtue, he should not lose his throne. The Empress Dowager has already decreed your removal." Huoguang roared. "What makes you think you are still the Son of Heaven?" With that, Huoguang strode forward, seized Liu He's hand, and personally removed the imperial seal and tassel from his waist, presenting them to the Empress Dowager. He then escorted the deposed emperor back to his temporary residence. "It is your own actions," Huoguang said, "that have severed your connection to heaven. We, your humble servants, have failed you. I would rather fail you than fail the state. I hope you will take care of yourself. I can no longer serve you." And at that, the history books record, Huoguang broke down in tears.
Yes, he cried. All of these dramatic, conflict-filled details are the official documented records from China's imperial histories. According to the Book of Han, The list of charges against Liu He numbered 1,127, an average of over 40 per day. They can be summarized into three categories: violating ritual, debauchery, and abuse of power. However, behind this smokescreen of moral accusations, the real reason for his deposition was a naked power struggle. His most fatal crime was attempting to build his own power base. He had brought over 200 of his own men to the capital and was rapidly placing them in key positions, attempting to replace Huo Guang's entrenched political machine. Huo Guang did not need a partner, he needed a puppet. The so-called 1,127 misdeeds was not a literal count, but a rhetorical device. The unspoken crime was political overreach. Liu He was chosen to be a figurehead, but he tried to be a real emperor. The history, written by the victors, was not an objective record, but a justification for a palace coup.
After the coup, Liu He's fate took a sharp downturn. He was stripped of his titles and sent back to Changyi. The 200-plus officials who had followed him from Changyi were all executed. The official charge was failing to properly guide their lord, allowing him to fall into wickedness. There were only two exceptions: the old tutor, Gong Sui, who had tried desperately to advise him, and one other minister.
Before their execution, the condemned men cried out, "He who hesitates when a decision must be made will suffer for his indecision." And this is the most direct proof of all. They did not die for their faults, they died for their failure.
All right, the troublesome prince of Changyi is gone. Now Huo Guang had a second problem. Who's next? The ministers, including Zhang Anshi, proposed a new candidate, a great-grandson of Emperor Wu, legitimate. 17 years old, malleable, raised as a commoner in Chang'an, politically inexperienced. And most importantly, an orphan whose entire family had been wiped out. He had no relatives, no allies, and no power base. He was perfect. Right? The problem was this candidate, Liu Bingyi, also known as Liu Shun, was, "Who are you?" "Your Majesty, who are you?" "Grand Marshal, I am no one. I am worthless. A fine emperor indeed." Let's pause here to untangle the family tree of Emperor Wu. He had 6 sons. The recently deceased Emperor Zhao was the youngest. The deposed emperor, Liu He, was the son of the 5th prince. The Prince of Guangling we mentioned earlier was the 4th. The 3rd prince had rebelled and been executed by Huo Guang. The 2nd had died young. And Emperor Wu's eldest son, the original crown prince, was named Liu Zhu. His mother was the legendary Empress Wei Zifu. General Wei Qing was his uncle, and the war god Huo Qubing was his first cousin. But Huo Guang, being Huo Qubing's half-brother, had no blood ties to him. In 91 BC, in one of the most devastating political events of the era, the witchcraft calamity, Crown Prince Liu Zhu was falsely accused of treason. His entire family was executed. The sole survivor was his infant grandson, who was thrown into prison. With the secret help of his grandfather's old allies, the baby miraculously survived and grew up between the city's alleyways and the palace's servant quarters. This was Liu Bingyi. There is a widely accepted theory among historians that the conspiracy against the crown prince was orchestrated by the Li family, the family of Liu He's grandmother, who hoped to make their own prince the new heir. Their plot was eventually exposed, leading to their extermination. If this is true, then Liu He was the descendant of the murderers, and Liu Bingyi was the sole survivor of the victims. So, would the newly enthroned survivor seek vengeance against the killer's heir? The answer is no. Because the greatest need, the deepest instinct of a survivor, is to survive. From the historical records, we can clearly see how this orphan emperor, raised in prisons and back alleys, treated Huo Guang with absolute deference. The histories say he was exceedingly humble towards Huo Guang. Whenever they were in court together, he felt as if there were thorns on his back. Overcome with anxiety and awe, He consulted Huoguang on all matters of state, large and small, never daring to make a decision on his own. This posture greatly pleased Huoguang, who believed he had made the right choice. Institutionally, Liu Bingyi confirmed Huoguang's status as the de facto co-ruler, requiring all memorials to the throne to be submitted in duplicate. One for the emperor, one for the Grand Marshal. In his personal life, he received Huoguang in the palace with the highest honors, treating him almost as a father. Perhaps it was this performance that lulled Huoguang into a false sense of security, which is why he was so taken aback by their first confrontation. The selection of the empress. Huoguang wanted the new emperor to marry his youngest daughter, Huo Chengjun, but Liu Bingyi issued an edict of extraordinary emotional and political brilliance. He announced, "When I was a humble man, I had an old sword that I loved. I miss it dearly now. Can my ministers help me find it?" This edict, seemingly about an old sword, was a masterful political metaphor. The old sword was his wife from his commoner days, Xu Pingjun. Finding the old sword was his declaration to the entire court. If I have not forgotten an old object from my humble past, how could I possibly abandon the wife who shared my hardships? The moment the edict was issued, the ministers understood. It was a perfect counterattack, appealing to the highest Confucian moral standards. Even Huoguang, with all his power, could not publicly oppose the emperor's decision to honor his first wife. In the end, he had to concede, and Xu Pingjun was made empress. Perhaps it was this subtle act of defiance that made Huoguang realize this new emperor was not so simple. Soon after, 2 life-or-death trials were laid before Liu Bingyi. The first was the death of Empress Chu. In 71 BC, she died suddenly after giving birth, poisoned by a bowl of medicinal soup, a plot orchestrated by Huoguang's wife, Lady Xian. The histories say that when Huoguang discovered what his wife had done, he was shocked and enraged. But in the end, to protect his family's name, he chose to cover it up. As a ruler who had clawed his way up from the very bottom, Liu Bingyi's understanding of human nature was extraordinary. It is impossible that he had no suspicions about his beloved wife's sudden death. But his situation was dire. The Huo clan's power was absolute. He had no ability to investigate or retaliate. He could only swallow his grief and, once again, choose patience. Even more tragically, he was then forced to marry the daughter of his wife's murderer. Huo Chengjun became the new empress. The second trial was the matter of returning power. In 68 BC, Huoguang formally offered to return the government to the sovereign. Liu Bingyi responded with extreme humility, refusing the offer and insisting that the state still depended on the Grand Marshal's guidance. The ceremony was little more than a political ritual. While the emperor began to handle more day-to-day affairs, the most critical decisions remained in Huoguang's hands. Liu Bingyi suppressed nearly all of his emotions, navigating these 2 deadly tests with superhuman rationality. And then, he finally got what he was waiting for. In the 4th month of that year, Huoguang fell ill and died. Upon hearing the news, Liu Bingyi displayed immense grief. He personally oversaw the funeral, granting Huoguang the highest honors a subject could receive, comparing him to the dynasty's first great chancellor. He visited the Huo family home to offer condolences, and his rewards to the clan reached their peak. Lulled by this warm reassurance, the Huo clan seemed to have forgotten the irreconcilable blood feud that lay between them and this orphan emperor. They forgot that this boy, now renamed Liu Xun, was
the legitimate grandson of the disgraced crown prince, the orphan of the witchcraft calamity, the imperial grandson raised in a state prison, the commoner who became the son of heaven, the adopted son of Emperor Zhao, the great restorer of the Han dynasty, the breaker of regents' shackles, the purger of the Huo clan, the conqueror of the Xiongnu Shanyu, the founder of the Western Protectorate, the absolute master beyond the Jade Gate, the master of law and title, the blender of the King's Way and the Tyrant's Way, the guardian of the Han Empire, the lord of all under heaven, the peerless sovereign of the Liu dynasty, Emperor Xuan.
Marquise. 3 marquises.
Thank you for traveling so far, my lord.
The flames of vengeance were now unquenchable. The great drama of a shadowy power struggle was about to begin. To see how it unfolds, you can click the info card to watch our special historical reenactment, The Orphan's Revenge.
Let's turn our gaze from this blinding sun back to the man left in the shadows. After 11 years of house arrest in Changi in 63 BC, Emperor Xuan, now firmly in power, issued an edict re-ennobling Liu He as the Marquis of Haihun. This was a move of great political wisdom. On the surface, it was an act of imperial grace. In reality, it was an exile, moving Liu He to the remote south, far from his old power base. But even as a marquis, Liu He was not truly free. A report from a local official described the 26-year-old Liu He as being in poor health, suffering from a rheumatic illness that made it difficult to walk, and dull in speech and action. Yet, the court's suspicion never ceased. Soon after, an offhand remark was reported to the capital, and Emperor Xuan issued another edict, stripping him of 3/4 of his income. After this final blow, Liu He's spirit was broken. In 59 BC, the ill-fated deposed emperor died in his fiefdom. He was just 33 years old.
If the story ended here, he would be just another tragic name in the vast annals of Chinese history. Like in the Roman Empire, which had its own short-lived emperors. Pertinax, killed by the Praetorian Guard after 87 days. Didius Julianus, who bought the throne and was executed by the Senate after 66 days. Or the 2 Gordians, who were proclaimed emperors in Africa and died within 21 days. In the East, as in the West, behind the titanic facade of power, there always lies the abyss. But Liu He's story, because of an accident 2,000 years later, took another turn. In 2011, an ancient tomb was discovered near Nanchang, in China's Jiangxi province. Archaeologists soon confirmed that it was the tomb of the deposed emperor, the first Marquis of Haihun, Liu He. It is the best preserved Western Han Marquis's tomb ever discovered. A seal bearing the name Liu He confirmed his identity. The discovery of undigested melon seeds and various medicinal herbs in what would have been his digestive tract offered a poignant glimpse into the final moments of his life and health. But even more revealing were the bamboo slips archaeologists unearthed, letters written by Liu He and his wife to Emperor Xuan and the Empress Dowager Shangguan. In the most humble and deferential language, they pleaded for permission to travel to the capital, simply to participate in the ancestral worship ceremonies as members of the imperial clan. The reply they received was simple and brutal: denied. And even more significantly, a wooden tablet, an official Edict of Abolition, not only recorded his precise date of death, but also revealed that just 39 days after he died, his marquisate was officially abolished by the court, a swift and final political erasure. But at the same time, we saw another side of him. The vast archaeological evidence has restored a truth deliberately obscured by the official historians. The discovery of a painted mirror depicting Confucius, over 500 bamboo slips inscribed with the Analects, and numerous incense burners and musical instruments suggests that Liu He may have been a well-educated, cultured, and refined nobleman. But no matter, history's verdict has been sealed. The place where he was sent was called Haihun. Hun, in Chinese, can mean dusk, darkness, or muddled and confused. Perhaps this was a deliberate coincidence. But in the history books and in the halls of academia, his title is fixed: the Emperor Fei. Fei, in Chinese, collapsed, toppled, abandoned, discarded, or rubbish.
For the end of today's video, we wanted to choose a poem with a tone different from Liu He's tragic life, and so we turned our gaze to a song that has been sung for 1,000 years, the Song of Li Yannian. Li Yannian was a court musician, the brother of General Li Guangli, and the brother of Emperor Wu's beloved consort, Lady Li. It was this very song that so moved Emperor Wu that he took Lady Li as his consort. From this union came the first prince of Changyi, and from him the Marquis of Haihun, Liu He.
Behold the northern beauty, past all grace, who stands alone, outside of time and place. Her first glance brings a city to its knees, her second glance, a kingdom's fatal ease. Do rulers not know thrones may turn to dust, and yet, for such a prize, betray all trust? For kingdoms rise and fall, a common thing, but such a beauty is a timeless spring.
北方有佳人，绝世而独立。一顾倾人城，再顾倾人国。您不知倾城与倾国，佳人难再得。